I've been doing this for the last couple of years where I have been watching 31 horror films during October, one film a day, and this episode is basically going to give a brief review of the films I watched in the first week. And for another episode, I'm going to be reviewing The Blair Witch Project because I feel like there was a lot to say about that film, so I'm going to leave that for another episode. So do stay tuned for that. So without further ado, let's talk about the other horror films which I watched in this first week of October. The first film I watched was a film called Sleepwalkers, which is directed by Mick Garris and written by Stephen King. The film stars Brian Krause as Charles Brady. Brian Krause played Leo on the really popular TV series Charmed. Him and his mother, Mary, played by Alice Krieg, are nomadic, shape-shifting vampires who feed off the energy of virgin women. And they have set their sights on Shelley Briggs from Twin Peaks, played by Mädchen Amick, who plays Tanya Robertson. This is a crazy film. Like, as this movie goes on, it just gets more and more crazy. And it is a very, very, very silly film. I call this movie the Con Air of horror movies. Like, it's a film that you shouldn't take seriously whatsoever. It's so campy. It's so nuts. You can't believe that Stephen King actually wrote this. It's so weird, and he even cameos in the movie, and it's one of many cameos. like Toby Hooper shows up. Clive Barker, who created Hellraiser, shows up. Joe Dante, who did Gremlins and The Howling, he shows up. John Landis, who did American Werewolf in London, he shows up. Mark Hamill shows up in the beginning of the movie, and you think he's going to be a really important character because a lot of the focus is on him, but he doesn't show up in the movie ever again. This movie is insane. It's so hilariously bad, but it's so bad it's good, like Con Air. And I kind of feel like Mick Garris and Stephen King, I feel like their original intention was to do a really serious horror film with a different take on the vampire genre, but it just turned into something really camp and silly, and they kind of failed in that. But if they were going to do something camp and silly that you don't take seriously at all, then they kind of succeeded in that route, but you don't really know what their intention was. The second film I watched was a movie called Cursed, which was directed by the great and late Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson. The interesting thing about this movie is not really the movie itself, but more about the production history behind the movie. The movie was originally filmed in 2003, and the script that Kevin Williamson wrote for the movie was described by Bob Weinstein, who was head of Dimension Films, who produced and, showed the movie to everybody and distributed it. He said this script redefines the werewolf genre. And the original film that they did was very different from what we got in 2005. It took 2 years for the film to be released after it was originally filmed in 2003. Christina Ricci and Jesse Eisenberg played brother and sister who, after experiencing a car accident, are bitten by a werewolf and slowly are changing into werewolves, and they have to find out who the original werewolf was before they are cursed forever and have to walk the earth as werewolves. And they weren't originally brother and sister in the script that Kevin Williamson wrote. They were two separate characters, but then as reshoots and re-editing of the movie happened, they became brother and sister. And so, yeah, there were a lot of changes with this movie. It was very much far away from what Wes Craven and Kevin Williamson were doing. And a lot of people had some things to say about the film, including Judy Greer, who stars in the movie. And she said, "I don't know why that movie got so fucked up. I don't understand it. I thought the script was fine, honest to God. I didn't get the big deal. I don't know who kept making them fuck with it. Then we shot the movie for 7 years. I think they said we had 4 movies worth of footage. It was so fun, but so weird. I don't get it. I couldn't figure it out." It's kind of a shame that movie got changed so much because it almost sounds like there was something interesting from Kevin Williamson's script, and it kind of would have. I'm doing kind of again. If that script that Bob Weinstein said would redefine the werewolf genre, then just leave it alone. It's Matt Damon or Ben Affleck or whatever, when Bob Weinstein or one of the Weinsteins re-edited All the Pretty Horses directed by Billy Bob Thornton, I think it was Ben Affleck or Matt Damon, I think one of them said, you can't expect to take 30 minutes out of the movie and expect it to be the same film. Like Wes Craven said, in an interview, he did say that the people behind the movie shot themselves in the foot with a shotgun. And watching the film, even though it is entertaining in certain places and some of the performances are good, you kind of get the sense that there was a lot of studio meddling with that movie and a lot of people saying do this, do that, while not letting the director and the writer, who had previously had huge success with Scream, they weren't allowed to replicate that success with Cursed. So that's kind of a shame. That sucks. So the movie I watched after Cursed was a movie called Don't Breathe from 2016, and that was directed and co-written by Fede Alvarez from Uruguay. Jane Levy from Evil Dead and Dylan Minnette and Daniel Salvato play three burglars who hear about this Gulf War veteran who has about $300,000 in cash from a court settlement where a young woman, a very wealthy woman, had killed his daughter in a car accident. They spy on the house and they find out that he is blind, so they feel like this will be a very easy break-in. Once they get into the house, getting into the house is easy. Getting out of the house is a whole different matter, and I don't want to talk anymore about the movie, but it's really, really good. It's really creepy. There's some really, ooh moments as well, but nothing too, graphic or gory or anything like that. The next movie I watched after that was everybody's favorite horror director, Rob Zombie, and his fifth movie, The Lords of Salem, which tells a story of Heidi, played by Sherry Moon Zombie, his wife, who is a radio DJ who then gets plagued by horrible visions of witches and all sorts of crazy stuff after she listens to a song sent to her by some people called the Lords. I like Rob Zombie's movies. I've been a fan of his ever since I watched the Halloween remake. I liked the Halloween remake. I thought there were aspects of it that were pretty good. And I understand why people don't like it. I love the Halloween, the John Carpenter one, and I think it's one of the best horror films of all time. But I really did like his take on that film. Mixed feelings about the sequel, but again, that's for a different review. And with Lords of Salem, he did a film where he had a little bit more creative control, like Jason Blum, who went off and did, produced so many of these low budget, really, some of them pretty effective low budget horror films, and he produced the recent Halloween film directed by David Gordon Green. He came and said to him, we will give you creative freedom and we want to work with you. And then the idea of Lords of Salem came out of that. And Rob Zombie described it as if Ken Russell directed The Shining. There's some really nice imagery in this movie, some very creepy imagery. It's one of the films where he was trying something a little bit different. It feels a bit more ambitious. It felt different from the style that we've seen in the Halloween films, particularly in films like Devil's Rejects and House of a Thousand Corpses. And it was quite nice to see him, do things in a different kind of way. It was a nice change of pace for Rob Zombie, and I actually quite liked this film. There are some really nice moments in it. I mean, it does meander a little bit, and maybe the ending is a little bit okay, I didn't quite think that it was going to go in that direction, but okay. But, it was a worthy attempt. It was nice to see him try something new, and I actually really liked it. And Sherry Moon Zombie, who plays Heidi, she's really good. Rob Zombie's really good at picking his cast. He does get really good actors into his movies, but actors who probably worked and were famous back in the 70s and did all these B movies that a lot of people liked, but probably over the years, people tend to forget about them, but he gives them, new life in his films. So I kind of respect him for that. And I know people don't like his movies. You either love it or you hate it. I like it, but you say what you will about his movies, but you can't deny he does have the vision. And maybe the writing is not particularly up to par with a lot of that, but he does have vision, and he is a very, visually his films are pretty good. I believe that. Some people might disagree, but fuck it, I don't care. I can say what I want. Next film I watched was Wishmaster, directed by Robert Kurtzman and written by Peter Atkins, who wrote some of the Hellraiser sequels. The movie tells the story of a genie, or jinn as it's called in the movie. And this isn't your Aladdin genie. This isn't your 10,000 years gives you such a crick in the neck. No, it's the complete opposite. In this one, this jinn, any person he grants wishes to, it's to his own devilish ambitions. Every wish that he grants to anyone, it always falls back on them in such diabolical ways, only to appease him and all that kind of stuff. Like, this film is a lot of fun. I found it very entertaining. This film is packed with so many actors from horror films. You got Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger, you got Kane Hodder, Jason Voorhees, Tony Todd, Candyman himself. You got Reggie Bannister, Reggie from the Phantasm films. You got Joseph Pilato from Day of the Dead, Ted Raimi, Angus Scrimm, who played the tall man in the Phantasm films. He narrates at the beginning of the film, and it's a very entertaining film, and just packing all these like famous like horror actors into it. It's so much fun to watch. This came out in the 90s, and back when you could practical and prosthetic effects were still kind of a big thing, and nowadays probably people would use CGI to cover up because it's, I don't know, cheaper and less time consuming. But I think there's a charm and a real coolness to prosthetic effects when they work and when they're used very well, and they're used extremely well in one particularly graphic scene towards actually two graphic scenes, one at the beginning of the movie and then one towards the end. Like, there's some really pretty gruesome moments in this movie. And Andrew Divoff, who plays the Djinn, the Wishmaster, he's just so good. He's just so devilishly good in this movie. He's just relishing every moment, and it's spawned 4 sequels and became like a franchise, and he only starred in the first one and the second one, and then somebody else played the Djinn in the third and the fourth film. They were the Wishmaster 2, 3, and 4, they were all released straight to DVD, but this film was successful enough to grant a franchise, even though critics were very quick to pan it. But I liked it. It was really good fun. I thought it was very entertaining. If you're a fan of that kind of stuff, late 90s throwback horror films, then definitely do check it out. Like, you'll sit there and you'll be like, oh, I remember that guy. Oh, I remember that guy from that horror movie back in the day. Like, I really liked it. It was a lot of fun. The movie I watched after was directed by Eduardo Sanchez, who co-directed Blair Witch Project with Daniel Myrick, and it's the film called Lovely Molly. It's very ambiguous. You're not really quite sure what is going on, and it is very creepy, and it's very well paced in so many ways. Like, while watching the movie, there are moments where you feel like, is this real? Is there a demonic presence, or is this woman just a little bit crazy and being haunted by some painful memories from her past? Like, you don't really know where, you're not really quite sure what's really happening. And I think you're really, you're following the film through her eyes, and it's very well done, and it's very well paced in some scenes. And Gretchen Lodge, who plays Molly, this was her first movie. She is amazing. She gives like a really, really great performance. Like, she just dials it up to 11. Like, she just starts as this very innocent girl, like newly married, like happy to get on with her life and push some memories behind her. Maybe the best idea wasn't to move into your childhood home where some horrible stuff happened. Like there's a lot of stuff in this movie that isn't really said. Like, there's not a lot of exposition where they explain what happened. It's very much hinted at, which I quite like. So your imagination goes a little bit like, I wonder what happened to her. What happened to her as a child? Like, what happened with her father? And like, what's going on? Like, what's going on in the house? Like, who's filming? Like, all these weird stuff. And I think it's like, it's not as good as the Blair Witch Project. I think the Blair Witch Project is very much high above Lovely Molly in certain ways. But I think, Lovely Molly is a very well-made atmospheric film, which is bolstered by a very strong performance from Gretchen Lodge, and it's very creepy. Like, there are some scenes where you're just like, I don't want to watch that. Like, there's some good like little horror moments. Like, it very much relies heavy on atmosphere and tension, and there is a bit of that in the film, so it works very well in that. So I enjoyed it. So, I mean, not a great horror film, not the worst horror film, a little bit in between, but it was pretty good. I like all the films I mentioned. They all have qualities to them that are really good and fun and entertaining, and scares as well. There's some creepy stuff in all those movies, and it's what you want in a horror film. They all have elements that make, why they all have elements that, prove why horror films are so successful and so well loved. And I recommend, as I do on my podcast to Adam, we recommend a film to each other. I recommend to whoever watches this to go check those movies out. That's an endorsement from me.